Ladies and gentlemen, we are exactly 21 miles away from total global collapse. Not because of a nuclear launch, mind you, but because of a single, narrow strip of blue water that controls the very pulse of civilization. Look at a map of the world. I mean, really look at it. It looks vast, open, and free. But that is a dangerous illusion. The reality of modern global power is fragile, you see. It is a house of cards, and that house stands on the foundation of a few razor-thin maritime chokepoints. These are the arteries of the planet, right? If these channels pulse with trade, the world thrives. But if they are severed, if they are gripped in a vice, the lights go out in London, the shelves go empty in New York, and the gears of the world economy grind to a screeching halt. We are talking about the hunger move. It is not some formal doctrine written in a military academy. No, it is a tactical reality. It is the strategy of turning geography itself into a weapon. By controlling a handful of miles, the Strait of Hormuz, the Malacca Strait, the Bab el-Mandeb, a single actor can hold the entire global community hostage without firing a single shot. Imagine the scene, a supertanker heavy with crude oil floating silently through a narrow corridor. The crew is calm, the world is unaware, but beneath the surface, the math is brutal. If the traffic stops for just 72 hours, the shockwaves are catastrophic. Inflation spikes, logistics chains shatter, and panic spreads like wildfire through every major stock exchange. Low and ominous, this is the ultimate strategy, using the very geography itself that makes us connected as the exact mechanism to tear us apart. History has shown us that empires fall, not just from battlefield defeat, but from the inability to keep their supply lines open. From the ancient Mediterranean to the high-stakes naval posturing of the 21st century, the control of these bottlenecks has always been the difference between a superpower and a footnote. But here is the question that should keep every strategist awake at night. What happens when the world's most powerful navies, bristling with guided missiles and cutting-edge radar, find themselves utterly powerless against a piece of geography they cannot change, cannot bribe, and cannot bomb into submission? Whispering, when the terrain itself becomes the enemy, how do you win a war you can't even see? Ladies and gentlemen, conventional history has, quite frankly, sold us a grand illusion. Descriptive, we are taught to look at the map and see the blue vastness of our oceans as a limitless playground of freedom, right? Intense, we imagine empires rising and falling based on the sheer grit of soldiers in the mud, or the size of massive land armies charging through the smoke of 100 battlefields. Dismissive, we are told that the sea is just an empty space, a neutral barrier between powers. Knowing, but the masters of war, the cold-eyed strategists who have shaped the last 5 centuries, well, they know a different truth. Firmly, to them, the open sea is a myth.
In reality, you see, the ocean is not a vast open field. It is a series of narrow, claustrophobic hallways. And in these hallways, there are doors. If you own the door, it doesn't matter how large your neighbor's house is. It doesn't matter how many millions of soldiers they can conscript or how much steel their factories can churn out. If you hold the key to the hallway, you hold their very survival in your hands. This is the strategic lie of the free seas finally exposed. The blue on your map isn't a highway, it's a tactical labyrinth, and for centuries the elite have fought tooth and nail to be the ones who decide who passes through and who is left to rot in the dark. Consider for a moment the British Empire at its absolute zenith. Ladies and gentlemen, how does a small rainy island on the edge of Europe come to command 25% of the entire planet? They didn't do it by outnumbering their enemies on land. In fact, the British land army was often a mere shadow of the massive war machines found in France, Prussia, or Russia. The secret was the great doors. The British didn't try to conquer every inch of the world. They simply identified the bottlenecks. They seized Gibraltar to lock the Mediterranean. They took Singapore to choke the East. They gripped the Cape of Good Hope to guard the passage to India. By garrisoning these tiny strategic slivers of rock and sand, they didn't need to conquer the continents. They simply controlled the breadth of those continents. It is maritime hegemony in its most brutal and efficient form. It is the realization that geography is a weapon more potent than any cannonade. When you control a strait, you control the flow of calories, the flow of fuel, and the flow of wealth. You can starve an empire into submission without ever firing a single shot on its soil. But while the British mastered the doors of the past, a new and far more dangerous game is being played in our modern age. Because as vital as these hallways were for coal and silk, they have now become the absolute jugular vein for the global digital economy. And there is one door in particular, a narrow strip of water where the margin for error is zero, where a single tactical misstep could collapse the world's markets in less than 48 hours. But that's not even the most terrifying part. The real question is, what happens when the world's greatest superpower realizes they no longer hold the only key? Ladies and gentlemen, in the cold and frankly calculating world of modern theater, the greatest weapon isn't actually a nuclear warhead or some stealth bomber. No, it is a concept we call the hunger move. It is the ultimate strategic pivot, a shift in mindset that moves the objective away from simply destroying an enemy's army and towards something far devastating, paralyzing their entire system. Think of the world's economy as a living, breathing organism, right? Its blood is oil, its nutrients are raw materials, its nervous system is the flow of digital trade. Sharp, the hunger move is the act of quite literally stepping onto the oxygen hose. By controlling a narrow corridor, like the Strait of Hormuz or the Malacca Strait, a nation effectively weaponizes the very concept of time itself. Darkly, they aren't just holding a waterway, you see. They are operating a psychological and economic guillotine.
In the war rooms of the 21st century, the most brilliant generals aren't looking for the next big battle. They are looking for the chokehold. They know that if you can halt the flow of energy for just 72 hours, the lights in the world's major cities begin to flicker. If you hold it for a week, the stock markets don't just dip, they vanish. This is the cold, surgical logic of systemic paralysis. I mean, why risk a billion-dollar hypersonic missile when you can bring a superpower to its knees simply by ensuring its resources never arrive? We are talking about a strategy where a narrow strip of salt water becomes more valuable than 1,000 tanks. It is a game of geography, where the winner is the one who can wait the longest, while the rest of the world starves for stability.
It shifts the battlefield from the mud and the trenches into the very bank accounts and fuel tanks of every citizen on Earth. But this leads us to a terrifying reality that keeps naval commanders awake at night. If the global system is truly this fragile, why is the world's most powerful economy, a nation with a military budget larger than the next 10 countries combined, so incredibly vulnerable to something as simple as a few strategically placed sea mines? Ladies and gentlemen, to truly understand the coming storm, we must first look at the map, not as a collection of nations, you see, but as a network of vulnerable arteries. This is the blueprint of a modern execution, a 4-step choreography designed to bring a superpower to its knees without ever needing to storm a beach. Step 1 is the identification of the throat. There are 14 points on this planet, 14 narrow gateways where the lifeblood of global trade is forced into a bottleneck. Think of the Strait of Malacca, the Suez Canal, or the Bab el-Mandeb. These are the world's jugulars. If you control these 14 points, well, you don't just control trade, you control the survival of every nation that relies on it. A strategist looks at these gaps and sees a kill chain. They identify exactly where the flow is thinnest, mapping out the precise coordinates where a single sunken tanker or a dozen sea mines could paralyze a continent. Once the throat is identified, we move to step 2, the silent encirclement. This is where the steel meets the water. In the dark of night, carrier strike groups move into position, not to attack, right, but to loom. They establish what planners call a denial zone. Hushed, atmospheric, beneath the waves, a curtain of attack submarines settles into the silent deep, cutting off every underwater cable and monitoring every merchant hull. It is a ghost-like presence, a ring of iron that says one thing to the world: nothing goes in and nothing comes out. Then comes step 3, the clamping of the vein. This is the moment the theoretical becomes a terrifying reality. The blockade is officially declared. Within hours, I mean literally hours, the global insurance markets go into a terminal tailspin. Shipping companies refuse to send their vessels into the zone. The flow of oil, liquid natural gas, and microchips, it all stops dead. This isn't just a military maneuver, it is a cardiac arrest for the global economy. In cities thousands of miles away, the price of fuel doubles, then triples. The stock market doesn't just dip, it vanishes. This is the stark weight of an engine stopped, where the absence of movement becomes a weapon more destructive than a nuclear warhead.
Finally, we reach step 4, the strategic suffocation. This is the climax of the hunger move. As the days turn into weeks, the internal pressure within the target nation reaches a breaking point. Factories go dark, food shelves empty. The power grid flickers and dies because the coal or gas needed to run those turbines is sitting in a ship trapped behind a wall of gray steel. This is where the opponent is forced into a choice: total economic collapse and internal revolt, or humiliating diplomatic surrender. It is a masterpiece of modern cruelty, a way to win a war by simply making the enemy's world stop turning. The trap has snapped shut, the lights are out, and yet, as the world watches the screens go dark, there is a chilling question that remains. What happens when the nation being strangled decides that if they are going to go down, they will take the entire global order down with them? Because as history shows us,
a cornered predator, never dies quietly. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in an era of digital warfare and space-age technology. We fight battles with invisible signals and drones that strike from the silence of the upper atmosphere. Yet, despite our silicon dreams, our survival remains tethered to the same ancient naval corridors used by the galleys of Rome and the merchant fleets of the Silk Road. As long as the world must eat and the machines must drink, the hunger move remains the most terrifyingly effective strategy in the history of human conflict. The nature of power has shifted, you know, but the geography of war is permanent. The question is no longer who has the biggest army, but who is standing at the gate when the lights go out. Today, the world's jugular veins are under more pressure than ever before. In the Strait of Hormuz, a single battery of land-based missiles could send the global economy into a cardiac arrest. In the Bab al-Mandab, the Gate of Tears, asymmetric forces use low-cost tech to challenge the dominance of billion-dollar carrier strike groups. And in the Malacca Strait, the shadow of a future blockade looms over every single geopolitical calculation made between the East and the West. We like to believe that our modern world is a fortress of progress, built on a foundation of unbreakable supply chains and high-speed logistics. I mean, surely we're too advanced for that, right? But the reality is far more sobering. We are living in a house of cards held together by the thin blue lines of the sea. History shows us that when the gates are barred, empires do not just retreat, they starve, they collapse, they burn. Our world is not more stable than the ancient one. It is simply more interconnected and therefore more fragile. The same narrow waters that brought prosperity to our ancestors are now the most dangerous flashpoints on the planet. We are only ever a few blocked miles of water away from a global dark age. Which of these narrow straits do you believe is the most dangerous flashpoint of our time? Is it the South China Sea, the Red Sea, or perhaps a corridor the world is currently ignoring? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to understand the strategies that shape our future, subscribe to Global War Insights. Thank you for watching.